I'm standing in Valley Mill Park, just off Randolph Road in eastern Silver Spring. As you can tell from its name, a mill once operated here. The ruins date back to the mid-1800s, but records show that this land was used for milling as early as 1723. Historians estimate that by 1800, there were over 80 mill sites throughout Montgomery County. Why were there so many? Where were they? And what did they produce? For the answers, we turn to the Office of History and Archaeology of the Montgomery County Department of Parks. If you visited one of Montgomery County's parks, you may have passed a mill or two. That's because our park system is clustered along streams, and so were the mills. Parks archaeologist Jim Sorensen explains that this county's geography is particularly well suited to water-powered technology.
Montgomery County is basically in the Piedmont, which I used to think was French, but is actually Italian, and it means foot of the mountain. So basically what's happening is that we are sort of slanted this way, sloping towards Prince George's County, which is the coastal plain. And because we're sloping down towards Prince George's County, water runs through swifter channels, bedrock is exposed, and it's a great place for water-powered technology. Just to show you, there were 32 road mill names in the county, which reflects the technology of the 18th and 19th century.
This is the Hyattstown Mill, located near Little Bennett Creek. Parks historian Mike Dwyer has studied this mill and the others that have been uncovered in our parks.
There were all sorts of mills. The basic type of mill was the grist mill that ground grain for wheat, corn, feed. There were sawmills that sawed lumber. There were fulling mills that dressed cloth from sheep's wool to make clothing.
There was Bowie Mill, Bell's Mill, Clopper's Mill, and Glen Mill, just to name a few. Most are in ruins and no longer noticeable to a passerby. Today, over 80 mill sites have been identified. The Hyattstown Mill is the best preserved. On this site, we have a rare example of both the mill and the miller's house still intact. The mill is a 3-story frame structure sitting on a stone foundation. It was built in 1798, and for more than 100 years, it functioned as both a saw and grist mill. The wheel is long gone, however, this is what it looked like in the 1940s. Up the hill is the miller's house. This frame 2-story building actually predates the mill. The original millstone now serves as its front stoop. This was only one of a series of active mills in this portion of Upper Montgomery County along Little Bennett Creek.
And along the stream on a progressive basis, we had a tan yard, the Hyattstown Mill, saw mill, grist mill, flour mill, merchant mill, had a cooperage and a blacksmith shop attached to it at various periods. Just upstream was Ziegler's sawmill and bone mill, which ground fertilizer, cow bones for fertilizer. And then they had a sumac mill, which made ground sumac leaves for use in the tan yard process. The sawmill and took logs from the timber and used the bark in the tanning process. Further up were several other sawmills, and finally at the top of the branch at Little Bennett over near Damascus was King's Distillery, which operated in the late 19th century and made a locally famous Maryland rye whiskey.
Valley Mill Park boasts the oldest mill site in the county. Land records dating to 1723 describe a small mill thereon. Today, this 18th century miller's house, made of brick, is the most visible remains. It's easy to see that the land was sculpted here to allow the water to flow over the wheel. This stone foundation next to this deep recess in the ground is where the mill stood. This is what it looked like in 1936. Another prominent mill site is Black Rock Mill along Seneca Creek. Here we see the remains of the mill. Made from Seneca sandstone, it dates back to 1815. This mill is located fairly close to the stream and was often flooded. The old Muncaster Mill is barely visible today. This picturesque frame structure replaced a stone mill in 1820. It was a multi-purpose mill that ground wheat and corn, sawed wood, and carded wool. Besides studying the structures that still remain, Jim and his crew excavate the sites to see what artifacts they can find. At the Hyattstown Mill, they uncovered one of the metal bands that held the millstone together, a piece of the millstone, and a gear wedge for stopping the water wheel when necessary.
The thing that tells us most about the lifestyle of the miller and the mill itself is the artifacts that come from the miller's house. And we've excavated 3 or 4 of those in the county, Hyattstown Mill being one of them. And there are an interesting number of things that we can tell from that. The first thing that we really want to know when we excavate that way is actually the date of the house. And in this case, excavating at Hyattstown Mill told us that the mill was built sometime in the late 18th century, and we know this from the types of artifacts that come from the ground. For instance, we have here Wedgwood's creamware. We know that creamware was invented by Josiah Wedgwood in 1762. So if you find this on the site, you know that there was no mill there prior to that time, or no house there prior to that time. But then we also get something called pearlware. It has a bluish tint to it, and this is hand-painted. And we know that this existed in the late 18th and early 19th century. So a lot of these artifacts, we have part of an interior glazed milk pan. It would have been a lead glazed milk pan. And milk pans, again, are particularly 18th century oriented. We have a number of buttons, too, that date to the 18th century. So putting all these sorts of things together, we can get a good time period on that. Plus the fact that we can sort of tell whether they were eating high off the hog or not. This does look like hog sorts of bones, and we can tell that they were cut and not sawn, so that they were probably produced right on the property there. They were small, in little small bits and pieces, and some of them are calcined or burned, so that they probably were used in stews and things like that. One dish sort of pottages, so it tells us about what types of things they were eating and what types of things they were eating off of.
The heyday for milling in Montgomery County spanned the 19th century. By the 1920s, water power technology was replaced by other forms of energy, and the mills began closing down. Today, all that is left of this industry are the remnants that were left behind.